Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Homaham Jyotir Gamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya Avir Ahavir Maedhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukha Tena Maham Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is life in the afterworld. And we're going to be talking about heaven and hell. Those of you who are students of the wisdom of the East and of the doctrine of reincarnation, you know that the death of the flesh and blood body is not the end of life. John Brown's body lies moldered in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. And there's life after life. We are reborn again on the earth to continue our karma, to continue our journey. And this morning we're contemplating a little bit what happens in the interim between death and rebirth. Now we can visualize a man who is lying on his deathbed, and his play on this earth is done. The curtains are closing, and he realizes that he has to loosen his grip, let go, say goodbye to his house, to his cars, to all his material possessions, to his family and friends, to his bank account, bank checkbook, and all of his investments, to his wife and children. And now he begins a journey alone, and he feels afraid. And he wishes that someone could hold his hand and accompany him. Now, who will accompany him? There's an old Buddhist story about a man who had 4 wives. His 4th wife was his very favorite. And she was very beautiful to look at. And he loved her the most. He lavished most of his attention on her and bought her fine jewelry. The 3rd wife he loved a bit less. But he valued her because she managed his whole family and all of his social calendar. She was very good with people. And whenever he went out to visit family and friends, he would take the 3rd wife because she knew everyone's name, knew all the stories, what was going, kept him up to date. Now his 3rd wife, he loved even less. But she also is very important to him because she managed all of his businesses and all of his accounts. And she kept meticulous records of all, and as a result of which he'd been able to amass great wealth. And so she was the source of all of that economic wisdom. His fourth wife was, he didn't think about her much at all. He didn't have a hardly value of her. In fact, she seemed to have lost. She was very thin. She didn't seem to have enough to eat. And, it so happened that man came to the last time of his life, and he came to die. And he wished that someone would accompany him. And he asked for his fourth wife, please come and will you accompany me on this journey through the valley of the shadow of death? And she said, oh no, I can't do that. I have parties to go tonight. I can't accompany you. And he was disappointed. And then he called his third wife. Can you accompany me on this journey? And she said, oh no, I have family and friends. There's so many of your affairs. I have to settle all of your affairs. I can't possibly accompany you after death. And then he called his second wife. Can you accompany me? She said, no, I cannot accompany you. I have to take care of all your, I'm your second wife. I take care of all your affairs, all your business transactions. I can't possibly leave that. I've got to balance all the books. So then he called for the first wife. That was his first wife. And he asked her, will you accompany me? And she said, oh yes, my dear husband. I've always loved you. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. I've been so neglected you, but you'll... And he was so happy that she would accompany him. And the fourth wife is the body. And the third wife is our family and friends. And the second wife is all of our business and material possessions. All those will not accompany us. Those we have to leave behind. But the fourth wife, that's our karma. She's our karma. And she will accompany us after death. And in fact, that's what gives us the motive force, the motive power behind that's going to move us as the journey then begins. And so the soul, the jivatma, withdraws the mind. This is how it's described. Second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The soul withdraws its mind from the senses like a tortoise withdraws its limbs. And the soul withdraws itself, this subtle body slips out of the gross body, just as at night we cast off one suit of clothes and we just kind of leave them on the floor. We're free of all those heavy formal clothes we had to wear at the business office. And so the soul casts off its gross body and it rises up and it looks around and it sees it still has a body. Well, but it's a subtle body. It's a shining body. And as he looks down, maybe he can see hovering above. He's still drawn to that location because that's where he sees his old body lying there. And all of his family are standing around the bed. And he feels a great sense of attachment and being drawn. And that's why the Aryan religions, that is the Greek and the Hindu, always had the tradition of cremation and of burning the dead flesh and blood body so as to sever once and for all the threads of attachment that the soul has. And the soul then, seeing that smoke rising from the funeral pyre, is now liberated. That is, it's free to move upward, just as a diver. Maybe you can imagine in a deep sea diver. You've seen the heavy leaden suit. He's walking around on the bottom of the ocean floor. What if he were just to shed that entire pressurized suit? And what would happen? Well, of course, immediately he would begin to feel the pressure of the ocean water. He would have to look up, and what does he see up there? He sees light up in the surface, begins to swim upward towards the surface, towards the light. So the soul begins its journey upward. Now, the first event that happens is that there is, so they say, there is a time of judgment. That is the first person that we meet after the death of our body is in Hindu mythology is called Yama Raja, the Lord of the underworld. Yama was the first man to die. And so he was given precedence over all others, and he was made the Lord of Death. He's a terrible figure to look at, with kind of a greenish red color to his skin, and the holding a rope. He's pulling the subtle body out of the gross body. He's riding on a water buffalo, and it's very disturbing to the mind to see that Yamaraja. But he's also a very wise man. That is, he's also called Dharma Raja. That is the Lord of Dharma, the Lord of justice. And if we look closely, we can see that around his neck, there is a mirror. And we can imagine there's the soul, looks in that mirror. He sees his whole past life, goes rushing past him. See, just in a moment, he sees his entire life pass before him. And we can imagine that at that time, the soul, how he feels. Maybe he feels he sees his whole life. He's done magnificent, very good works, served all of mankind. He's very, very proud of himself, and he's happy at what he's done. He's very accomplished a lot. He feels good about himself. Yes, I worked very hard. I deserve a reward. And his mind begins to turn upward towards the heavenly worlds, which promise great rewards for good deeds. But we can imagine another soul who looks in that mirror and who sees in a flash his entire life goes by, and he feels a great feeling of disgust and distress. How I've wasted my life, how terrible it is, all the things that I've done. And he resolves to get tough with himself and to be strict with himself and to discipline himself. And his mind naturally turns downward towards the lower nether worlds which lie below. So these are the two directions that the soul may go. Well, he may heaven and hell. Now, heavens, it may surprise you to know that in Indian philosophy, although usually you hear about a lot of talk about soul, metaphysics, and soul, God, and religion. We don't talk much about heaven and hell, but there they are. The heavens and hells, just like in all the other religions. And in Indian mythology, there are 7 heavens. Bhurbhuva, Swaramar, Janastapasatyam. Those are the 7 worlds above. Those worlds are the highest of these worlds are spiritual planes. Lokas, they're called. And the lower of the 7 are worlds which are very much like our own. That is, they're worlds of experiences and enjoyment. The only difference really being that we don't make karma. These are heavens. The purpose here is to balance the economy of the moral economy. So we have the 7 heavens above. Similarly, it is corresponding to those 7 heavens. There are 7 nether worlds. And, we've seen those worlds that are depicted in famous, in the accounts of scriptures, visions of saints and sages. If you read the lives of saints, you'll come across references. Saints have had glimpses of these worlds. Great artists like Hieronymus Bosch made a whole famous triptych of a 3 heaven, earth, heaven, middle world, and the afterworld. Detailed pictures of what's going on in each one, so we get a visual representation. Similarly, in Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, a great literary classic, a work of visionary literature that describes to us gives us a graphic idea of what these worlds may be like. Now, the question that arises, we're students of philosophy. So our first question is whether we're critical thinkers. And so that's the question that will arise here is, do these worlds exist? That would be the question. Do these worlds exist? Well, we know that if we think about heaven, we look up and we get a telescope, we can see far through the cosmos. We don't see anything that corresponds to what we call heaven. That is, through sense perception, we can't see any visible proof that such a place exists. Furthermore, we cannot deduce. That is, we can't use inference either. Because inference has to deduce from the sense perception. That is, we can't deduce from what we have seen that there are such worlds. And however, in Indian philosophy and in the Vedanta philosophy, it's important for us to understand that we have 6 pramanas. Let's reduce them to 3 to make it simple. That is, there's 3 ways of knowing the truth about reality. One is through sense perception. The second is through inference. That is what we call reasoning. And the third is called the Shruti Pramana. That is the scriptural testimony. In the Vedanta philosophy, that is in Vedanta, the scriptures are considered to be a valid source of information about all things transcendental. How do you know that God exists? Because it says so in the scriptures. That's because saints and sages and rishis, that is the mantradrashtas, who've perceived the things that are written in the scriptures, that's where we learn about God. That's where we learn about Maya, where we learn about the whole, the nature of the world, where we know, do we have a soul? Well, yes, the only place where we can go to get that information, that is a valid source of testimony, is scripture. And therefore, on that basis, we assume that these worlds exist. Now, in addition to that pramana, in addition to the valid testimony, we can also cite some other very reasonable arguments. And that is, we could say, we believe we're students of the law of karma. And we know that whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And we know that everything that all of our actions go around and return to us again in the form of our karma, and that there is a great law of balance. This is called the law of karma, the law of justice. It's called the law of balance. What that means is that in the moral sphere, the books all have to balance. All the accounts are squared. That in terms of good and evil, the forces of good and evil are all in balance. This is a cosmos. It's not a chaos. And therefore, the law of karma says that the law of karma, that's a divine law, which governs the nature of the universe, kind of requires, we look around us in this world, we don't see justice here. We see injustice. And if this is a closed system, then the books doesn't compute. That's why we have to assume that it's an open system, that there are other worlds in order to maintain the integrity and to maintain the coherence of the unified worldview. Now, let's say, for example, that you were a contractor. A person was a contractor. He did a job, and it's a time now for him to be paid by the homeowner for this big job that he did. Okay, well, that will be $10,000. Oh, well, I'm so sorry, sir. I don't have $10,000 cash here around on the premises. Now, if it's a closed system, that is, if the whole transaction can't get outside that system, then there's a problem. That is, there's a great imbalance. There's injustice. However, we know what the householder will do. He'll just write a check. He'll hand him the check, and the contractor will go to the bank, that is to an outside source, and he'll cash the check, and everything will be back in, the books will be balanced. Justice will be restored. And so heaven is a place like that. It helps us to balance the economy of good and evil actions in the world. It kind of makes sense. Let's say that you were to work. You were work all year, and you know that you're looking forward to your vacation. Yes, you have a vacation. And your time's coming up for your vacation, and you think, yes, that's very good. And then you look up a place to go, a vacation resort to go, and you look in there and you find, well, there isn't any place to go. And you would think, well, that's not fair. I've earned a vacation. If there aren't any vacation resorts, what if you're a criminal? You committed some great crime, and you come before the judge says, well, you have to serve some time in prison. And then they look up and find, oh, I'm sorry that there aren't any prisons anymore. Well, what are you going to do? He's just going to walk free? No, it can't be like that. So there must be places outside of of our conceptual cosmos that That is, there must be worlds within worlds. And there must be lower, higher, and higher worlds. And we can ask ourselves this question: where, if we assume, let's assume that these worlds exist, then we may ask ourselves, where do they exist? Where do they exist? Now, it used to be thought, you read old books, old legends of ancient times, old ancient times religions. Yeah, they picture a saint. A saint is praying to heaven. His eyes are turned up towards God in heaven, up there. It's all very astronomical and geographical, and they talk here about the earth going down into, you don't go down through the north. It's not the North Pole, it's the North Hole. You go down through the hole and into the middle of the earth, and there you're in the infernal regions as depicted by Dante. So, according to one point of view, these worlds are real terrestrial astronomical locations. Now, there's another point of view that is maybe the most common, and that is that this references to these places is metaphorical in nature and symbolic. And just as if you go to Hawaii and you have a wonderful time in Hawaii, you come back and somebody, how was it? He said, oh, it was just heaven. It was like heaven. You ask someone in wartime, in the wartime, what was it like? Oh, it was hell. War is hell. So like that, it's kind of metaphorical. Once there was a disciple. Disciple was walking with his guru. And the disciple asked his guru a question. What is heaven and what is hell? Can you explain it to me? And the guru says, yes, let's come along with me. And so they walked over a hill and dale. As they came up, they looked out, they saw a great meadow. And there in the meadow, under a tree, there was a big, broad table with all the delicacies of a feast had been laid out on the tables. And all the people around the feast were there, but the disciples, the guru says, look more closely at this. He looks closely, sees that everyone is shedding tears. They're very sad. Why? Because if you look closely, you see that their arms are strapped with kind of metal straps on their arms, so they can't bend their arms, and so they can't eat. Kind of like a Tantalus hell. They can't eat that food. And the guru says, yes, you see this? This is hell. And so they went on their journey ways over hill and dale. They came to another meadow. And there the disciple looked out. There he saw, yes, there's the trees. There's a great feast is laid out under the trees. There's the people there. And he looks more closely and he saw, yes, those people also have those iron straps on their arms. They can't bend their arms. But these people were all smiling and laughing. They were having a wonderful time because each one was taking the food off the table and placing it in the mouths of the others. And so they were all eating. And the guru says, yes, you see this? This is heaven. So here we see a second definition of what is heaven and hell. It's metaphorical, it's symbolic. Third attempt to explain these places we find with philosophers, idealist philosophers, psychologists, tell us that the heaven is just in our mind. It's just like It's just as we fall asleep at night and we dream, a whole dream world, we know that we have that creative power. Similarly, it is that when we, at the time of the end of our life, maybe we go to sleep one night and we begin to dream and then we don't wake up. That's because we're dead. But our dream goes on, and we're living in that dream world. And so these are different explanations of where are these worlds was our question. And the students of the Vedanta philosophy object to all of these attempts to explain away the lokas of the afterworlds. And the Vedantins maintain the very strong claim that these are real worlds, that these are not metaphorical, these are not these are not terrestrial or astronomical, and they're not symbolic, but they are very real. Now, what does that mean, real? You see, here, because in Indian philosophy, yes, it's Vedanta, this fundamental Vedanta 101, but we believe that as scriptures teach us, that there is the gross, the subtle, and the causal. There's not just the world that we see through the eyes, the flesh, but there is also a subtle world, a subtle plane, a subtle dimension. We could call it like a frequency, if you can imagine a higher frequency. And there on this higher frequency, these worlds on a higher level of vibration. These worlds exist. That's what Holy Mother says. She says in one place, everything that is here. Now, it's good for us to contemplate what that means. Everything that is here. And we look around, I see, well, I don't see any heavens or hells here or here. But if we think a little bit, now wait a minute, there's a lot that we can't see because we know that there are a lot of video images floating around here and audio files floating around. I mean, if we had a radio and we tuned in the radio, we tuned in the television, we could capture all those. We know that very well, so it's not difficult for us to imagine that there is a frequency, just as with light. We can see a certain spectrum of light, but beyond the ultraviolet, we're blind. And beyond the infrared, we're blind. And the only claim here it's being made is that the reality continues. Reality doesn't just stop where our world stopped. Reality continues. So what we have here is a great esoteric cosmology that kind of unfolds of three levels of reality: the gross, the subtle, and the causal, and worlds within worlds, and higher worlds and lower worlds that all together make up a great economy of a great cosmology. Now we can say so much for, we're asking, where are these worlds? Well, they're right here. And so we can assume that maybe there are such worlds, and that they do in some way exist at a higher vibrational or lower vibrational level. And so then we could ask ourselves the question, well, if we were to die, and at that time of death, we go back to the mirror, we're judging ourselves, when we judge ourselves, we're not being judged by some monotheistic God in heaven. We're self-determined by our own prarabdha karma, and we're going to be there. We're going to be moving according to our own past judgment. So the question is, how long do we stay there? Well, we can imagine that it'd be very difficult, even if we talk about something. Maybe if we talk about space travel, some kind of hypothetical time dilation effect of a spaceship that flies nearing the speed of light, we know very well how it can be that there can be a great, vast amounts of time can pass. When here we don't have any conception of that time. And but we have the differential equations to determine exactly what it is. But in this case, we don't have any such equations. We have no way to determine how long it will be. One thing, however, we know for certain, and that is that our time in these afterworld is not eternal. It's not eternal. Because why is it not eternal? Well, according to the great law of karma, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. That is, there's a balance between the fruits of our actions and our actions. And however many actions we do in one life, the fruits of our karma will be limited. They will not be infinite. And therefore, whatever are the results of our good deeds, that would enable us to enjoy a heavenly world. Those fruits of the momentum of all that good karma will come to an end at some point because it's finite. We can't have a finite action cannot have an infinite result. Furthermore, the idea of an infinite or eternal heaven and hell is really a contradiction in terms. Because if you think about it, an eternal heaven would be a hell. And maybe some of you have seen a great resource for students of philosophy, the old television episode, The Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Twilight Zone episode. A nice place to visit. Begins with the opening shot there of Rocky Valentine, a small-time criminal who's in a gunfight and he's shot dead. And the smoke clears, the dust settles, he wakes up and he looks around. What is he so surprised to see himself? He's in a beautiful hotel room. Looks like a hotel room. He looks around and it has all the amenities of everywhere he looks, the finest, refined, expensive, lavish amenities of a 5-star hotel. And he looks there, he looks over in the corner and there's a fat man sitting in the easy chair. He said, "Oh, hello." He said, I'm here. He said, "Who are you?" "Oh, I'm your guardian angel. I'm here to give you whatever you want." And then Rocky thinks to himself, wow, yeah, somehow they got mixed up. I got into heaven. That's wonderful. I'm here. I made it up to heaven. And he whatever I want. Well, he said, "How about something to eat?" And no sooner did he say that, there's a knock on the door. Has room service. And they come in. He dines there in champagne and caviar. And, he looks there and see this is like a huge hotel casino gambling establishment. And so he tells the fat man, he says, I think I'll go downstairs. Thank you very much for that. I think I'm going to go downstairs and try my luck. And so he did. He went down there and he rolled the dice once and he won. And he rolled it again and he won. And again and he won. And then he went to the play cards and he won. And then he took a little break and he began to think about this. Well, this is heaven. Yeah, I'm going to win every time. See, he's used to a reckless life. He's used to living a life that's kind of ups and downs like a roller coaster. He wants some excitement in life. This is not exciting. As a matter of fact, this is very boring. And so he lost all interest. He saw through that game. And he went back upstairs to his room. And there's the fat man sitting there. And he says, sir, he said, I thank you very much for all you've done for me. It's a very, very nice of you. But on second thought, he said, I think I'd rather try my luck in the other place. And the fat man looks at him and said, oh, this is the other place. So like that is the idea being an eternal heaven, that is, heavenly rewards, lose all meaning. And for a student of Vedanta, that's a good subject for contemplation. Robert Nozick's experience machine. What if you could just go into heaven is just like the Matrix. You just go in there and you just get wired in and you have wonderful, pleasurable experiences forever. What's wrong with that? Well, that's good for us to think about. What's wrong with that? There's some fundamental philosophical, psychological reasons why that doesn't work. So that's the subject of philosophy. So, but in the end, we see that the heaven is not eternal. We can see here that the similarities, we've seen that there are similarities and differences between the Christian idea, with which most of us are familiar, and the Hindu idea. And the characteristic feature, the defining feature of the Indian conception is that these worlds are not eternal. That heaven is not our final resting place. It's only a halfway house. It's part of the process. If your prarabdha karma, go back to that moment of judgment when you're looking in those mirrors, it may be that you do have a third choice. That is, you may go up or down, or you may decide, no, everything is in order. I'm ready to be reborn on the earth and continue my journey, in which case you would be reborn again immediately. And thus the whole machine continues to function smoothly. But the fact is that the heavens and hells, these afterworlds, are not final resting places. They're just halfway houses. We pass through that. Then we're reborn on the earth. We live our lives. We make progress. Only in the karma bhumi, only on this earth, do we make moral progress. As human beings. That's because we're human, because we have a human soul. We make moral choice. That's why we move forward. We have to return to the earth. The gods in the afterward, they don't make karma. They have to return again to the world. And so that's the interim. And I think my next lecture will be titled, How is the Soul reborn. So that we'll discuss on a future occasion. Okay. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantirehi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om. Peace is on heaven, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.